The ship that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday. I was 43 days into my tenure as Fleet Admiral of the Riven Compact when the contact report came in from Perimeter Station Gowan. A single vessel, transponder code scrambled, hull configuration matching no registered class in the database, moving at a speed that suggested either a damaged drive or a crew that didn't trust fast approaches. They'd broadcast on the old emergency frequency, the one we hadn't used in 2 centuries, and their message was 7 words long. We are Earth's people. We are coming home. I had them brought in under escort. I was on the receiving dock when the airlock opened. There were 41 of them aboard. The youngest was 8 months old. The oldest was a woman named Dara Velk, 91 years of age, wrapped in a thermal blanket someone had sewn from insulation panels, with a tattoo on her left forearm that read Orchard Reach Habitat, Earth Reg. 0041. VLK, punched into her skin by her own grandmother 60 years prior, so the line would not be lost. She walked off the ship under her own power. She did not ask permission aboard. She looked at me the way I imagine a person looks at land after a very long time at sea, not with relief exactly, but with the particular exhaustion of someone who had stopped permitting themselves to feel relief until their feet were actually on solid ground. There are more of us, she said. 6 systems. We've been counting for 30 years. I asked her how many. 87,412, she said. Those are the ones we can verify. We believe the total is closer to 110,000. The Verith Consortium's dispersal records are not complete. Some lines were separated. Some names were lost. I asked her where the rest of the names were. She pressed her hand to the inside pocket of her coat. Here, everyone we could reconstruct. Every habitat. Every family. My grandmother wrote the first 419 from memory on the back of a cargo manifest the day after the Consortium moved us. Her handwriting gets shaky at the end. She was 11 years old. The Verith Consortium. I knew the name. Anyone who had studied Earth's colonial period knew the name. A resource extraction syndicate operating out of the Kethra cluster, licensed by the old Outer Rim Commerce Authority 3 centuries ago to conduct labor and population transfers in unregistered habitat zones. What the license meant, in practice, was that if you lived far enough out in a habitat that hadn't been formally recorded by the Central Registry in the last census cycle, the Consortium could classify your home as an unregistered settlement, your people as unregistered biomass, and move you at their discretion to wherever labor was needed. They had done this to 14 outer reach habitats in a span of 11 years. 180,000 people. Men, women, children, the elderly, the sick, people in the middle of meals and lessons and repairs and sleep. Loaded onto Consortium transports, dispersed across 6 labor systems. Their names replaced with asset codes. The habitats were stripped, the orbital markers removed, the entry records sealed under a commerce exemption. By the time Earth's central government, fractured, overwhelmed, arguing about trade frameworks, looked up and noticed the Consortium had already moved the operation deeper into the cluster. There had been inquiries. There had been reports. There had been, eventually, a diplomatic note of formal concern. The Consortium had filed it and continued operations. That was 340 years ago. The people they took did not disappear. They survived. They survived the way that organisms survive things that should kill them. Not cleanly, not without cost, but with a stubborn, unremarkable, furious persistence. They learned the Consortium's language and kept their own. They taught their children Earth's registry codes before they taught them anything else. They married across lines and kept their separate names. They built informal networks across 3 systems and then 6. They scraped together parts and fuel and 1 functional ship over 30 years of careful accumulation, and they sent 41 people, 1 from each surviving line, home. To report, I spent 4 days with Dara Velk and her 40 companions. I read every document they carried. I verified every registry code against Earth's colonial archives. I cross-referenced the habitat designations against the old Outer Reach survey maps that had been sitting in a sealed file in the Compact's historical division, unread for 200 years. Every habitat matched. Every code verified. Then I took the list of names to Admiral's Council, and I read it aloud. It took 6 hours. We did not stop for breaks. 180,000 names, or as many as Dara Velk's grandmother and the generations after her had been able to reconstruct. Some entries were complete. Full name, habitat designation, family unit, birth record. Some were fragments, a surname only, a habitat code, a child's age noted in the margin without a name because the child hadn't been named yet when the consortium came. We read the fragments too. When I finished, the council chamber was very quiet. I said, the Verith Consortium is still operating. They have reduced their scope since the licensing laws changed, but they maintain 41 registered holdings in the Kethra cluster and 6 active transit operations. Their current assets include a private security fleet of approximately 200 vessels. I said, I am requesting authorization for the Riven Compact to deploy. Authorization was granted before I finished the sentence. We took 860 warships. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say we were not angry. Anger is a state that burns and exhausts and requires maintenance. What the Admiral's Council carried out of that chamber was not anger. It was an accounting, a ledger that had been sitting open for 340 years in a drawer no one had opened, and we had finally opened it and read the balance, and now we were going to settle it. That is a different thing entirely. Anger makes mistakes. An accounting does not. We arrived at the outer boundary of the Kethra cluster on the 61st day after Dara Velk walked off her ship. I opened a channel to the Consortium's primary relay station at Kethra Primus, and I began to read. Not demands, not ultimatums, not a list of charges in legal language. Names. I read from Dara Velk's grandmother's list. The original 419, the ones written by an 11-year-old girl on the back of a cargo manifest the day after she watched her home disassembled. I read them in order. Full names where we had them. Fragments where we didn't. I read the child without a name as unnamed infant, orchard reach, approximately 4 months old at time of transfer. The Consortium's security fleet scrambled. 207 vessels, moving to intercept formation. They were between us and Kethra Primus, and I could see on my tactical screen that they were uncertain. We were not approaching on an attack vector. We were holding position at the boundary, and my channel was open and I was reading names. I read for 4 hours. The Consortium's fleet did not fire. I don't know what they thought we were doing. I don't know if they were waiting for a demand that never came, or an ultimatum, or some explanation they could negotiate against. We gave them none of those things. We gave them the names. When I reached the end of the list, the last fragment, a surname only, Tammy's Outer Reach Habitat 14, no further data, I closed the document and I sat with the silence for a moment. Then I told them what would happen next. I said, every holding, every transit operation, every asset, every record, you will open all of it to our investigators, and you will return every person currently held in your labor systems under any classification that predates the 2389 Commerce Reform, and you will provide full restitution accounting to every verified descendant line. You will begin within 48 hours. I said, if you do not begin within 48 hours, we will begin for you. Their fleet did not respond. Their relay station did not respond. 47 hours and 51 minutes later, the Consortium's lead administrator transmitted a request for terms. We did not grant terms. We granted compliance protocols, which is not the same thing. Terms suggest negotiation. There was no negotiation. There was a list of steps to be completed in a specified order, with a Riven Compact observer assigned to each facility, and the consequence of non-completion stated plainly in the cover document. 87,412 verified survivors came home over the following 14 months. The count, when all searches were complete, reached 103,000 and change, lower than Dara Velk had hoped, higher than she had let herself believe. She was present when the final transport docked at Perimeter Station Gowan. She stood on the same dock where I had received her 9 months prior, and she did not say anything for a long time. She watched people come off the ship, people who looked like her, who carried the same careful exhaustion, who pressed their hands to their forearms the way you press a wound to check if it's still bleeding. Eventually, she said, My grandmother always said they hadn't counted right. She meant the consortium. She meant the dispersal records. She was right, I said. She usually was, said Duravelk. That was the end of the Verith Consortium's 340-year account with Earth. Not a war, not a massacre. An audit conducted at scale, with 860 warships parked at the boundary to ensure the figures were not disputed. The figures were not disputed.